Hunter x Hunter chapters 396 to 399 are where grief, strategy, and layered nen design all lock together. If chapters 391 to 395 build the pressure, these chapters deepen the emotional core of the Phantom Troupe and then throw us back into the present with even more tension on the Black Whale. So in this video, we are focusing only on chapters 396 through 399, the Phantom Troupe flashback, the return to the lower tier haunt, and why these chapters make the Black Whale feel more like a crime thriller than a normal battle arc. Let's start with chapter 396. This chapter continues the Meteor City flashback and spends more time on the group before they became the Phantom Troupe we know. That matters because Togashi is deliberately making us sit inside their humanity. We see performance, collaboration, and childhood identity being built in a world with very little protection and very few resources. Chrollo stands out immediately. Even as a kid, he is intelligent, expressive, and magnetic. He can organize people, translate meaning, and hold attention. The future spiders do not yet feel like a gang here. They feel like children finding belonging through creation, and that makes the word troupe incredibly important. At this point, the name carries a sense of art, play, and shared purpose. Later, that same identity becomes fused with violence and revenge. Togashi is showing us the original emotional meaning before it gets corrupted by tragedy. Chapter 396 is painful because it makes the future feel heavier. The closer we get to the innocence of the group, the harder it becomes to ignore what they will one day turn into. Then chapter 397 takes that tenderness and breaks it. Sarasa disappears, and the emotional atmosphere collapses. This is one of the most devastating pivots in the entire Succession Contest storyline because Togashi does not need exaggerated spectacle. The loss itself is enough. The silence around it, the shock, the guilt, and the realization that this world can do something unspeakable to a child from a place nobody protects. And then comes the most important response in the flashback. Chrollo does not simply explode in blind rage. He starts thinking structurally. That is the moment that changes everything. He begins imagining power as a system. He talks about preparation, communication networks, baiting predators, and building something large enough to answer the evil that killed Sarasa. In other words, grief becomes method. That is the foundation of the Phantom Troupe. Not just a group of friends seeking revenge, but an organized identity born from trauma and aimed outward at a cruel world. What makes this writing so strong is that it does not clean up the troupe morally. It does not ask us to forget their future crimes. Instead, it asks us to understand the wound that sits underneath them. And that is much harder, and much more interesting. Then chapter 398 throws us back into the present, and the mood changes again. Now we are with Nobunaga, Phinks, Feitan, and the search for the Heil-Ly hideout. This chapter is dense with nen logic, which is exactly why it works. The characters are not solving the problem by just pushing forward harder. They are trying to read the architecture of an ability. What kind of nen is creating this space? Where does the trap begin? What conditions are active? Which part is misdirection and which part is the actual mechanism? That kind of scene is classic Hunter x Hunter. Action is still present, but the real tension comes from deduction. And Nobunaga is especially interesting here. He is often remembered for straightforward force and sword presence, but these chapters show that he has real tactical perception. He reads pressure, pattern, and hostile structure with better instincts than people sometimes give him credit for. By the end of chapter 398, the hideout does not feel like a simple hideout anymore. It feels like space that has been weaponized by intent. Then chapter 399 takes that tension and turns it into confrontation. Heil-Ly and Nobunaga come into contact with multiple Heil-Ly members inside the hideout zone, and the chapter becomes a showcase for one of Hunter x Hunter's biggest strengths. Nen is rule-based conflict instead of just visual spectacle. The encounter is tense because nobody is simply throwing generic attacks at each other. The danger comes from rules. Displacement, damage, transfer, expulsion, removal, territorial logic. That is what makes this part of the arc feel so distinct. Nen starts behaving almost like legal language or weaponized bureaucracy. If you do not understand the rules of the space you are in, you can lose before you fully understand what happened. Heil-Ly continues to shine here because he treats information as survival. He and Nobunaga both pay attention to traces, missing neighbors, movement patterns, evacuation behavior, and the implications of who is no longer present. That detective-like thinking is part of why these chapters are so gripping. Everybody is trying to reconstruct an invisible system before the system kills them. So what is the bigger picture across chapters 396 to 399? First, the flashback completes a major emotional reframing of the Phantom Troupe. They become sadder, more human, and more tragic without becoming innocent. That distinction matters. Togashi is not excusing them. He is showing how trauma, abandonment, and intelligence fused together into a brutal collective identity. Second, the return to the present reminds us that the Black Whale conflict is escalating through complexity, not simplicity. The Heil-Ly are dangerous because they combine instability with hidden structure. The troupe is dangerous because once they decide to act, almost any fragile balance can collapse. And the Mafia struggle matters because it is not isolated. What happens on the lower tiers affects the entire ship, including routes, security pressure, rumor flow, and long-term political stability. If we focus on the key players here, Chrollo is obviously central in the flashback because we are seeing the birth of his worldview. Nobunaga becomes more interesting because he bridges emotional loyalty and battlefield intuition. Feitan and Phinks reinforce the constant threat hanging behind every investigation. Heil-Ly remains one of the most capable non-troop operators in the arc because he keeps thinking clearly under conditions designed to confuse him. And Morena remains terrifying because her side of the conflict rewards escalation itself. Her people are not just criminals using Nen. They are people being reorganized by a system that encourages them to become worse. Emotionally, chapters 396 and 397 are the heart of this section. They force us to look at the Phantom Troupe not as a mystery made of cool silhouettes and criminal legend, but as a group whose identity was shaped by loss and by a world that treated Meteor City like a dumping ground. Then chapters 398 and 399 show what happens when that history collides with the current crisis on the Black Whale. The result is an arc that feels cerebral, suspenseful, and deeply unstable. So if you step back and look at chapters 396 through 399 as one unit, they do something remarkable. They complete one of the most emotionally important flashbacks in Hunter x Hunter. They intensify the hunt through the lower tiers, and they turn Nen into a system of spatial paranoia and procedural danger. These chapters prove that Hunter x Hunter is operating far beyond simplified choreography. It is about trauma becoming structure, loyalty becoming violence, and intelligence becoming a survival tool inside a collapsing system. And that is exactly why this stretch of the Black Whale arc is so hard to stop thinking about.